Hello, I'm Kevin Donaghy with Brokers.law. Today I want to talk with you about the due diligence process and why it's so important to the overall sales process. What is due diligence and when does it occur? Due diligence is when the buyer is examining the books and records and interviewing employees of the company that's for sale and reviewing their contracts and insurance and any other matter they feel is important to determine that the company is as it's presented itself in its summary financial information, and the buyer will gain confidence that this company is as it's represented, and the buyer wants to go forward with the sale. The due diligence process is typically done through the use of your third-party intermediaries, your lawyers, brokers, and accountants. The reason for this is you don't want the buyer talking directly to your employees, and generally you will have pulled this information together and transmitted this information already over to your broker or to your lawyer. So they already have your 3 years of tax returns, your 3 years of financial statements, your key contracts, your employee non-compete agreements, and your employee files. So the due diligence process is done with your financial advisor and legal advisors, and typically the buyer is also using his financial and legal advisors in the process. His lawyers are reviewing your contracts. His accountant or his CPA is also reviewing your financial records. His salesperson might be looking at your sales, etc. When does this occur? The due diligence process typically occurs after the deal has gone to contract. And how this usually occurs is initially you exchange some non-disclosure and non-solicitation agreements between the parties, and then summary financial information is disclosed between the parties. And that's where you're summarizing the seller's results over the last couple of years. You might be giving them the cover sheets to the tax returns, and you're showing how the business is doing and maybe a summary of the assets of the business. From that, if the buyer is interested at that point, oftentimes it'll move towards either exchanging more detailed information, but typically right at this point, it'll either go to a letter of intent, which is a summary of the items that'll be included in a contract, or it'll move right to the contract stage. The contract will outline the terms and conditions under which this business will be sold from the seller to the buyer. And the contracts are obviously very detailed. In the contract, always there will be a due diligence period, and that is the period where the buyer examines the books and records. So due diligence usually occurs after contract. There'll be a set time period. Sometimes it's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, in order for the buyer to get comfortable that the books and records of the seller are in order and the business is as it's been represented, and the buyer is confident. Then they move forward to a closing. The seller gets paid. The buyer pays the seller, and the buyer takes over the business. Why it's important, the due diligence process is important because the buyer is going to be asking the seller all types of questions. Most of them will start out being about the financials and the results of the company. If the seller has his information in a very organized and concise fashion where he can immediately give that information to a buyer, the buyer is going to have a lot of confidence that this business is being run tight and it's being run properly, and he's much more likely to close. If a buyer is asking him for information, and every time the buyer asks for information, it takes a week to get it or it has to be produced, the buyer is not going to feel as confident about the business, and it will be less likely to close. Typically during a due diligence period, that's the period where the buyer examines the business and he makes the decision whether to go forward to a closing or to pull out and you receive a refund of his deposit. It is similar to a residential real estate contract, which many people have been involved with, where there's an inspection period or a due diligence period of 45 days where you look at the house, you have an inspector come over and check the plumbing, check the electric, check the roof. It's similar in that this is done for business also. You check the sales, you check the expenses, you check the contracts, you check the agreements that you have with suppliers, the agreements that you have with your customers. Yeah, and look at obviously all the historical financial information that the business has. We have another separate video on preparing for sale where I talk about getting yourself ready legally and operationally and financially, so you have all those things to help the due diligence process go smoothly. The smoother the due diligence goes, you're much more likely to go ahead and close on your sale and get paid. More information can be found by clicking on the links below or going to our brokers.law website. Thanks, and have a great day.